Will Power, should I sell Apple this morning?
No, sir. We continue to like the Apple story. And I guess right behind me, as you can see, we've kind of got the graveyard of devices that Apple's eviscerated over the years. And look, our bet is
Love
that the
it.
power of the ecosystem is still as strong as ever. So we take the long view on Apple and still like the overall setup.
Well, what do you get out of events like today, these days? What do they mean? I remember 8 years ago it was big. We used to line up outside. The media made a big thing of it. This is what Tom's getting at. What's the change now? Is it useful? Is it instructive of anything?
Well, look, I think the benefit is the regular cadence that they deliver and consumers have come to expect, at least with respect to iPhone and now some of the wearables categories. And I think folks do want to know, what's on the horizon, but particularly in these one-off, so-called S years, as consumers have become accustomed to, the changes are typically, more incremental, right? So the event becomes bigger in those, every other year periods where the form factor changes more dramatically.
When I buy the stock, what am I buying, Will? A luxury goods provider with a monster margin or just a capital returns monster?
Well, I think it's a combination of that, right? And that's why we like it. But it's also still an innovation engine, right? I mean, who would have thought that their wearables business could be a $40 billion business, or that services is now approaching $70 billion businesses. And so you're buying, what's been a monster cash flow machine. And this is a company that's going to start to approach $100 billion of annual free cash flow, in a company that has the ecosystem to still power additional technology innovation over time, like a potential autonomous vehicle. And those are the types of things that you play for over the long time.
Will, you mentioned services, and this has been an emphasis for Apple. How does the Epic ruling having to do with the payment for specific apps and whether Apple can really take a bite out of it or allow them to go to their own providers, how much does that crimp their potential revenue going forward from services?
Well, right. It's a good question. Listen, I think you have to kind of back up and, look at the numbers a little bit to peel back the onion. While services is growing, 20% plus, and it's become a big focus of the company, it's still just about 20% of the overall business. And of course, App Store is just one component of that services stream. And so on our analysis, you're looking at a potentially low single digit, percent EPS impact a few years down the road. But of course, that's subject and contingent on potential appeals on the part of both, Apple and Epic, and what the consumer behavior looks like. So, there is some potential, impact, but we don't view it as overly meaningful at this point.
Well, but Will, how much is this just sort of a precursor to many additional moves that are similar going forward, especially as the Biden administration takes a harder look at some of these companies? How much can Apple rely on their hardware side of their business, and how much does services need to overtake in order to justify this company's valuation?
Well, services is a very important part of the story, right? It's the faster growing piece of the story overall, or at least had been, prior to the pandemic, which ushered in the needs for a lot of these work from anywhere devices that, Apple provides, all of us. And so it remains a, laser focus for the company and investors, A, the growth rate, but B, it also generates higher profit margins on average as you look at, gross margins versus the hardware side of the business. So it is important to them, and it helps solidify the ecosystem. And so it is something that, we and investors will continue to keep a close eye on. But at this point, we still, feel good about the broader setup there.
Well, in about 8 minutes, all we'll talk about is inflation. BTIG came out with a call yesterday to downgrade Nike on supply constraints. The focus there for Nike, Vietnam. Can you walk me through the constraints around the Apple iPhone? I imagine it's like the labor market. Demand's really sky high. Can they supply that demand?
Well, that's a great question, Jonathan. And they're not going to be immune to some of the pressures in the marketplace on that front. Of course, they have a CEO who came from the supply chain side, and they've done a great job, probably as good a job as anybody over the years at navigating supply chain challenges. Obviously, this is a particularly acute time and issue, not only for Apple and others. I think our expectation is they'll be able to largely navigate it, but without question, there are going to be, some impacts. And candidly, we don't know fully, how deep those will run at this point. But at the end of the day, the key for them is the demand indicators, which I think are still healthy. We had a survey out that we put out just in the last week or so as part of the preview, and our view is there's still a really healthy upgrade opportunity, but it could take a little longer, right, for supply to meet the demand.